The Junkman's Apprentice. It's a story based on my memories from when I was 13 years old in 1965. I was facing my first major life crisis, and now it was time to confront it. Here I was, soon to be 13 years old, and I didn't even have a guitar yet. In 1964, the Beatles had taken America by storm, and my three closest friends already had guitars and were strumming away to She Loves You. She loves you, yeah. My birthday was not far off, and I had asked for a small practice guitar as a gift from my parents. The price was only $30, not like my friends that cost more than $50. I felt like I was being quite reasonable by asking for a dinky practice guitar to start with, but you know how parents can be. They just don't get it sometimes. For my dad, who worked 2 jobs and a lot of overtime, $30 was way too much for each of us 4 kids to get on our birthday. $30 was equal to about $230 in 2017. At the time, I didn't understand the great injustice being done to me when my friends had all gotten guitars from their parents. I began to realize at this young age how life was not always just. My parents, who had lived through the Depression, knew how important this was for me, and they came up with a possible solution. I was all smiles and really excited to hear just what the plan was. They had both agreed that if I came up with half of the amount, they would match it with this year's birthday gift. My fantasy of one day becoming a rock star was in one swipe dashed on the rocks of impossible demands. How was I going to get close to earning $15? In those days, an allowance was maybe 25 cents a week, and even if I could cut a lawn or 2 a week for that amount, it was going to take a long time to save up enough. I wasn't old enough to legally work in a business yet, but I sure wished at the time that I could have. The 60s weren't like the good old days when my parents grew up. There weren't all those child labor laws. Yeah, those were the good old days. I was always pretty good with numbers, and I figured that if I could work like the kids back then and earn 10 cents an hour, I could easily have earned $1 a day in the normal 10-hour workday. Just think of it. In a matter of a few weeks, I could have earned the full $15. Later on in life, I was to learn that those children were working to help their family survive, not to buy superfluous things. Times had changed, and now I was going to have to find some other way of making the necessary cash. As I sat moping on our front steps, a big rusty brown pickup with an outrageously loud muffler pulled into the driveway next to ours. It was our elderly neighbor's son, whose name was also David. The bed of his truck was stacked 5 feet high with every variety of scrap metal that you could think of. It was all held in place with jammed-in pipes on one side and rusty bed spring on the other. Everything looked like it was ready to spill out at any moment. It certainly took my mind off my problem when David Batty, who I knew a little, came over and asked me if I wanted to make some money. I was up and off those steps in a hurry and said, sure. He had missed making it to the junkyard before closing time, and before making a delivery the next morning, he needed to pack things better. He told me that he'd give me a quarter for standing at the side of the truck while he handed me pieces to set on the lawn. I wasn't going to make the big bucks that I needed, but it was better than sitting around moping. We worked well together, and it didn't take long to repack it all. When we were done, he asked me if I'd like to have a regular job. He told me that it would pay 50 cents for a couple of hours of riding around with him in the morning picking up scrap metal. I told him that would be great and that I could begin next week when summer vacation started. My mind was spinning doing the math for how many days it would take to make the $15. It would take 30 days. That was a lot of days, but I wanted the guitar more than anything. There were 2 days before my birthday, and now I had good news from my parents. First, I was going to have to get their permission to work as a junkman, but they knew David, and I was confident they would say yes. My dad spoke with him to be sure that I would be safe, and he seemed convinced that I would be. My dad found some heavy gloves for me to wear and then reminded me that I needed to find out what my hours would be. I caught David just as he was pulling out and asked him what my hours would be. He told me that it would be only 4 days a week, Tuesday through Friday, and it would be from 6 a.m. to 8:15 a.m. My mind screamed, "What?" But I kept my composure on the outside. He told me that he'd pick me up at 6 a.m. sharp, and to not be late because we had to beat the other junkmen before they got the good stuff. You know, refrigerators, discarded furnaces, and in general any other big and heavy junk metal. I gulped as David pulled away with his muffler backfiring and the rusty sides of his truck rattling. On my birthday, I figured out that because I practically had money in the bank, I could get forwarded the whole amount that I needed for the guitar. My parents didn't quite see it the same way and said that the deal still stood, and when I had earned my half of the money, they would take me across town to purchase the guitar. Tuesday morning came around quickly, especially since it was 5:30 a.m. when my alarm clock went off. I hit the snooze button and rolled over for just a minute. Well, that minute turned into 20 minutes before I pried one eye open to see the clock that now read 5:50. I jumped up and hurried to the bathroom, took a piss, rinsed my mouth out with some water, threw on some old clothes, grabbed a piece of bread, and then ran out the front door just as the noisy junk truck was coming down the street. Then I realized that I had forgotten the work gloves and dashed back into the house. As I came flying out with the screen door slamming behind me, the truck pulled up with its squealing brakes announcing its arrival. If there was anyone still asleep on my street after that, I would have been surprised. It was like a loud, rattling tank had just rolled down our street at 6 a.m., and no amount of pillows over one's head could block it out. I didn't care, though, because I was starting my first real job. I might have been half asleep, but I felt pretty proud of myself sitting up there in the shotgun seat, setting out on a new adventure. By 6:30, I wasn't as excited as when we had started out. It was hard work, and we were really moving at a fast pace. As we rode around, I found out that this was David's second job, and that he had a full-time job that he started at 8:30. Helping him get those refrigerators up into the truck was especially difficult. And if my father ever saw what we went through sometimes, I'm sure he would have put an end to my job. Luckily, people didn't fear injury or getting sued back then, so I could safely keep my job. David liked how hard I worked, and each day he gave me my 50 cents. Sometimes on Friday, if it was an extra good haul for the week, he'd throw an extra quarter. After 3 weeks, I had saved $6.50, so I was almost halfway there. I was making an average about 22 cents an hour, but still that was more than twice what kids made during the Depression. Besides, my savings were adding up, and in about 4 more weeks I would have enough. Later I would find out that the minimum wage was $1.15 an hour, but that was for legal work. I was underage, so I was glad to have my job. I could see the light at the end of the junkyard, and I wasn't going to complain about the hard work now. That was a good thing because David offered me a chance to make an extra $2 on each of the next 2 Saturdays. I was quick to ask him what the hours would be and what I'd be doing. He told me that it would only be from 8 a.m. until about 1 o'clock and that he'd buy me lunch. All we'd be doing is hauling things out to the curb from his parents' backyard. It sounded pretty good, and beside my hourly pay almost doubled. There's no way that I could go wrong with this deal, right? It turned out that we'd be tearing down his parents' ancient barn and lugging it and everything inside it piece by piece out to the curb. When I first heard this and looked up at the gigantic 2-story barn, I thought he was kidding. He wasn't. We got to work, and by the end of the first Saturday, we had 40 years of accumulation emptied out and moved to the curb. For the next 2 Saturdays, we tore down that dilapidated barn, board by board, so I got even more overtime. At the end of 6 weeks, and the beginning of the new school year in sight, I had more than the $15 that I needed. With that last Saturday's work done and 6 feet of barn debris stacked at the curb, I collected my last paycheck and ran home to ask my parents to take me to the music store. They hadn't really planned on taking me at 2 p.m. on Saturday, but a deal was a deal, and they knew how hard I had worked to get to this point. I was pretty proud of my little dinky folk guitar, and I rushed to show it to my friends. They were less than impressed and told me that kind of guitar didn't fit in with their electrics, so maybe I could play tambourine with them. I couldn't believe it, but to be part of the band, I temporarily went along. I taught myself how to play guitar, but it wasn't rock and roll that I came to like the most. It was folk music from people like Bob Dylan and Joan Baez and Pete Seeger, Tom Rush, and many others that inspired me. My rejection from the in crowd actually led to my becoming more independent and later a songwriter. I came to realize that I had things to say and that I wasn't going to be satisfied with just being a good performer.
We want to stay true to you, stay true in what you want to do, stay true to you, live what you know is you, do the best that you can do to stay